Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the show that goes beyond the data to explore the people, the stories, and the insights that drive business success. I am Dave Bookbinder, and I'm known as a business valuation expert and best-selling author, and I thank you for joining me. Today, I'm super excited to welcome back somebody who's been here before. She's a change facilitator. She's an expert in organizational dynamics, and her name is Erica Wexler. Erica, welcome back to Behind the Numbers.
Good morning, Dave. Any chance we have an opportunity to have a conversation together is a great way to
And
start.
why not do it on camera in front
Why
of
not?
more than 100 countries and let the world hear what we're talking about?
Well, we've got shift to say, so let's say it.
We sure do. And as you say, shift happens. So,
Sometimes that F pops out. We got
well,
to
you
go
know
find
what?
it.
It's all good. I think we're PG, but naughty bits are okay here. I've had some folks drop some naughty bits here, so you wouldn't be the
Oh, there
first.
won't be any naughty bits. Those Fs mean we have to find it. It's the fun. It's the feedback. It's the flexibility. We'll talk about that in a moment about what we mean when shift happens and what
All right,
we heard from employees.
let's first reintroduce you to the audience who may not remember back 187 episodes or so ago when you first came on the show. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Erica Wexler. My business is transformational guidance. I work with organizations and leaders, management teams to remove the obstacles that are getting in the way of transformational growth, the obstacles that are getting in the way of performance, productivity, workplace satisfaction, so that leaders can work together to create an environment and a culture where people flourish and are proud to work.
Well, that really resonates. So let's, without further ado, jump in here. So, as you just said, you describe yourself as somebody who removes obstacles to productivity, engagement, and so forth. So, what are the top hidden obstacles that you see most often when you first walk into an organization?
One of the biggest is that they're not necessarily asking the right questions. There are a lot of assumptions being made by leaders and by managers about what they think the employees need to feel productive, to feel proud of how they're contributing. And they're focusing on things such as tasks instead of asking the correct question, which is instead of asking, what is everyone doing? I'm not hearing them talk about the obstacle that's in the way, which is asking the question instead, how is everyone contributing?
Interesting, interesting. And I know you talk about bridging the gap between what leaders think their people need and what they actually need, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about a time where maybe that gap surprised you.
I was asked by a management team to speak to the managers to find out what was it that the managers were looking for in terms of how they defined high potential, how they defined engagement. When the manager would say, Erica, we're struggling in the workplace. How do we help our managers be better managers? And I got a chance to speak with a couple hundred employees at different levels, including the ones who were considered mid-range contributors. And what surprised me most with the answers was how the managers were describing what they most wanted from their employees was a willingness to contribute. That surprised me. It wasn't so much the stuff that was getting done. The managers were saying, we want them to have a sense of energy and we want them to be willing to do it, even if it's not perfect. That was a huge surprise coming from them. On the flip side, the surprise was what the employees said. It turned out I was able to joyfully go back to the management and leadership team and said, your employees are not only engaged, they absolutely thrive within the way that you are working with them and managing them because you are listening to them. And what the employees was saying was important also wasn't so much the stuff. It was those intrinsic motivators about the leadership and the governance, the motivation and satisfaction. And what was motivating them wasn't so much the recognition and the bonuses. It was having a manager who asked questions and who cared about them. It gave them a feeling of security. So those two surprises combined, a willingness and the energy within imperfection, and the feeling of security that those managers were providing. That was the biggest surprise that came out, was they were a lot closer to meeting each other where they were than they thought they were.
On behalf of the employee folks out there in the audience who are listening, I want to unpack the management response about the energy situation. What is it they're looking for? What do they want people to demonstrate in terms of that type of energy?
They talked about it in a way of saying go-getters, people who would take the initiative, people who would ask, but not just the ones who were willing to step in and do a little extra. It was the ones who were willing to be humbly confident, to ask questions, to say, this is my strengths, these are my interests, and asking questions about how can I take this feedback and do something a little better? How can I take this feedback and do something that's going to align with what the organizational goals are? So those managers, when they were looking for a willingness, it was, I'm willing to not be perfect. I'm willing to get things wrong, but I also don't want to have to tell you 13 times to do the same thing over and over and over. So it's the willingness to be able to accept the feedback, ask the questions, and take the time to confirm that they understood what that feedback meant. Is it an expectation or is it an option? And bridging that difference together with those employees who are asking the questions. So for the guidance for those out you, firstly, for those of you listening who might be earlier in your career, taking the time to not just wait to be told what to do, but to ask some questions such as, when you say this, this, and this, why is that the priority instead of this? How do you see me being able to contribute? I'm working on this, this, and this. Are those still the priorities? Has anything changed since the last time you gave that to me? But with a sense of confidence where you're doing it without having to check in every 5 minutes with someone. So there's that balance in between, Dave, of how do I check in with just enough, but also take the time to do it and learn from what's different. And if a manager says it's not quite right, do it and then model back that you show that you listened and confirm until you start to get the new habits in place. That
Interesting.
willingness to change.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And I guess in that regard, I want to talk a little bit about the what you do in terms of change management because you're involved in systems thinking, applied neuroscience. Share a little bit about your background on that and what drove you to actually choose to specialize in change management.
It started in my 20s. When I flip back a few decades, I was always driven by a need to make things better, by finding a way to help people to believe in themselves in a way that allowed them to change individually so that we could then work together collaboratively across the group and the team where we could then make the change on a larger scale, whether it's organizations or systems. So it was that multi-lens, as you said, systems thinking lens of what's really going on with the root cause. What are those big obstacles beneath what people say the problem is versus taking some time to help them fall in love with the problem instead. And then figuring out how to address what's in the way so that we can land on the solution that works for everybody. To your question about what was it about this, my personal journey in change has been transformational. It's figuring out how do we bring people together and make it a good use of their time? How do we bring it together where something different happens on the other end that makes it easier for people's day-to-day work? How do we really get to the root of what's causing people to feel small? What's really getting in the way of trust between teams, between people? And as I began working on the larger change initiatives, I began to realize that something was happening in the invisible space, the space between the managers, the space between the management and employees, the space between the external chaos that was happening and the internal thinking patterns we had. So I began asking more questions. And that was when, through my own journey, figuring out how to rewire my own patterns, my own thinking, my own obstacles, led me to start thinking not just from a systems thinking perspective, but from that advanced applied neuroscience perspective of how do we bring to surface the invisible, the non-obvious influences that are causing us to show up, that are causing turbulence on the surface, that are causing tension, that are causing systems not to operate the way that they need to, so that we can actually address what's in the invisible space in between and not just what we can see around us. So there's that connection there where it started with my love of puzzles. I mean, even really, if you really want to go back when it says, how did I get interested in this and what was it? It started with my love of puzzles. I love putting things together and seeing where things were going to fit. I love playing with that on the playground where we were putting clues together. I loved games and puzzles where we would put things together where you knew it was going somewhere, but you weren't quite sure where it was going yet. Sometimes I'd put the cover away and see what came out. And then other times I would look at the cover as my goal and then put it together and see where it was. And for me, the human mind, the organizational systems, the way that people work together, it's one big puzzle with a lot of parts that keep shifting.
Man, you are not kidding. You're not kidding. I'm going to talk about communication because that's an area where so many of us stumble. So, what are some of the communication malfunctions that you've seen? And is there a question that leaders could ask to maybe surface that?
One of the malfunctions that I've noticed is a dismissal of what's really happening. I'll give you an example. When a management team or a leadership team is an issue is raised, a consideration is raised that there's a lack of trust, where people who are working in this department, people in this department, it doesn't tend to be in the verticals within the organization. It tends to often be across the departments, where there seems to be sometimes a lack of trust that's happening, where, ask on a poll, how much do you know what everyone's doing on a scale of 0 to 5? It's usually about a 2.3 on whether anyone knows what's really happening in the organization. And I had a CFO ask me, Erica, how much does that really matter? And then I think about that. So for the next couple of years, I began thinking, well, how much does it matter when people don't know what everybody's doing across the organization? And the answer that kept coming up more and more and more was, it matters a lot if you're expecting people to be independent, willing, and trusting. Not just trusting of one another, but trusting in the processes, trusting in the change, trusting that they're going to be able to work together to figure out whatever is going on within their day to day, and they're working towards something bigger than themselves. So that biggest malfunction is when I hear a concerning comment, when someone says there's not a lack of trust, and the executives or the CEO or the CFO says, I don't think that's the issue. That's the issue. That's the issue. Because trust always feels like space. And when we're working on things, if people are feeling tighter, if people are feeling smaller, people are starting to hold on to their projects, their processes, their territory, their people, their budgets, their P&Ls, what's happening behind is there is an issue with trust. And if that's not addressed, everything else that goes on the surface is going to create a lot more obstacles and issues that could be avoided if you take a moment to pause and then move.
Interesting. So, trust is something that I talk about in my book. It's something that we talk a lot about in this program. And you literally cannot underestimate the impact of that simple concept of being able to trust your team, and certainly the importance of knowing what everybody else is doing. If you're going to try and do your best work for your customers, it's kind of a big deal. So, thanks for calling
It
that
is.
out. Yeah. Maybe in a similar vein, you talk about accountability in your messaging. I'd like to maybe have you explain how you define accountability in today's organizations, especially with remote work and hybrid work.
That's really important. I can provide some information on this in a deeper level for anyone who's interested. I'm going to go back to the conversation that I had. I was working with a couple of different organizations, a nonprofit, one that's in a larger multinational corporate organization, where we started looking at how they were measuring performance. No surprise. CEOs, executives, everybody's talking about, how do we create accountability? And what does that look like, and how do we define it? I began working with them to ask a different questions. How do we turn accountability into a measurable KPI, key performance indicator, that's run by verbs? Action-oriented accountability that can be measured, that can be turned into goals. And to do that, it's a shift away from what are people doing to how are people contributing? And what does accountability look like as a verb, as an action for those who are core contributors, who are meeting their goals, who are completing everything independently, who are taking responsibility to figure out what they're supposed to be accountability for with those check-ins, as opposed to the high contributors who are going to go a little extra and go beyond what their job description says they need to be doing, to those are exceptional achievers. So when we look at accountability from different ways, we've picked up 15 KPIs, key performance indicators, that can easily be measured specifically under the area of accountability, because it was so critical for managers and leaders, as well as the employees, to understand how people were defining accountability. Because that 360 accountability is often used as a word or as a noun, as a thing, without being defined. So Dave, how you're defining when you say, I need you to be more accountable, and I'm hearing what you mean by I need to be more accountable. Accountable for what? Accountable for delegating? That's a big one with managers. Accountable for not doing everything yourself? Or are we talking about accountability for behavior? Are we talking about accountability for getting things done on time, for meeting deadlines? We need to define what accountability means and move it around. And what does that 360 accountability look like as an employee, as a contributor, as a manager, as an executive, so that employees have the freedom to hold the managers accountable for helping make sure that they know what they need to be doing and how and have the resources to do it. The accountability of the executive team to make the decisions that give people the training, the security, the information, the communication, the AI, the technology, whatever we're starting to talk about, to be able to do what they've been asked to do in a way that meets quality. So the expectations are aligned. We've got to shift accountability from being a thing to being an action.
It's probably one of the best definitions of accountability I think I've ever heard, and not just on this program. So thank you for sharing that.
If you ever want to really nerd out with me, I mean, this was so important because for 10 years, Erica, accountability, accountability, accountability. How do we get our people to be more accountable? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Again, they're not asking the questions. There's this assumption that's creating the turbulence, that are creating the obstacles. They're not sharing the same language. It's been such a gift, Dave, to be able to ask the question is, what does accountability mean from a systems thinking, multi-level impact so that everybody's working? And it's been really amazing to speak to the clients who have now adopted that. They are gaining back 2, 3, 4 hours a week of their time because the language and the expectations are no longer being interpreted as an option. People know what to do.
It's so much more than just, did you do your job?
What does that even mean? And that's the other piece, that everyone's job keeps changing. And as we look at how AI is starting to impact the workspace, where I am spending a lot of technology time, I've partnered up with folks in technology, in AI, in operational side, and then I bring in the human transformation side of that change readiness of where does the accountability start? Who's in charge? That's often a question I start asking. Who's in charge of that transformation? Who's in charge? Who's responsible? It goes back to some of the models that I've worked with some organizations and management teams as well as employees to be able to define accountability and the who's in charge question differently, not just based upon title or role. Those keep changing. They're going to continue to change. How we need people to be contributing in 3 months and 6 months and 12 months and 18 months is already starting to significantly change. The trends are already changing the way people are working in the workspace. When it comes to the shift that needs to happen within the organizations, it's aligning everybody around that understanding of it isn't what people do. It's understanding, how are you expecting me to contribute toward these goals that are moving? And when this changes in 3 months, when these processes change in 6 months, when we get a new manager, a new leader, an employee leaves, this happens, and we start to look at that team alchemy. What's the culture alchemy that we're creating? So that as things shift, people are prepared not just to give everyone a title, give everyone a job description, and put everybody in a position, but to position each person, to position the organization, to position the department for growth instead of just putting everybody into positions. Big shift.
Yeah. Shift happens, eh?
Shift happens. Tell you where that came from. Look, I'm a dancer. So I've always been around, how do we create movement? How do we do this? How do we look for the open space? What do I bring off the dance floor when I put my bare feet out there and I start looking? How do we create some movement so people don't feel so small and stuck? And a long time ago, I began talking about things shifting and things shifting and things shifting. In one of the engagement studies, my team and I had an opportunity to do with a couple of different companies, the shift and what that meant emerged into SHIFT. 5 simple priorities in order for the shift to happen from the middle of a conversation, the middle of change, the middle of confusion, the middle of growth. We need 5 things. The S, people are craving social interaction. That doesn't mean we're going to bring everybody back to the office and everybody's now going to work in the office now instead of working from home and then think that organically the social interactions are going to happen. It needs to be done well and it needs to be thought through thoughtfully. But people are craving social interactions these days, the ones that stick. So they have those relationships and the friendships that help them through when things get tough. They've got that friend at work. They've got that colleague who, when they walk in the day, no matter what else is happening, they enjoy seeing them. They enjoy being there in that space with them. The second was the H, and that was the hybrid environment. And we know that's not changing. It's interesting. I was speaking with a group of HR professionals the other day, and we were talking about the trends that have impacted from 1985 to where we are now in 2025, and 40 decades of workplace trends that have formed the human resources field and industry. And one from 1985 was hybrid environments. And I said, what's not shifting and what is shifting? They're like, that's not shifting. We are now in a very different way, still talking and still struggling with hybrid environments. And it's coming out from what the employees are telling me, the managers, the C-suite. There's a level of confusion that's still happening right now. When you focus on the hybrid environment, there's not an easy answer to it, or we would have figured it out 40 years ago. But that conversation is still necessary. The I, the innovative efficiencies, that was 5 years ago, before the transformations happening now with what's going on with AI. And when leaders take a moment to pause, to not just say, we need to start investing some money in AI, people are already using it. So what's going on behind the investment in AI, in technology, in business processes, is a need for thoughtfulness to help the shift happen responsibly, because people are already using it. And if you don't understand how each of your departments is using technology, how the individuals and your employees are using AI to be able to figure out their emails or to craft things or doing this, your proprietary information is going to start to get watered down. And when someone leaves, it goes with them. There's a lot of conversations that are happening that aren't happening because people are just doing. So that is one where the innovative efficiencies and the shift happens is very important for people to focus. The F that we talked about that's popping out isn't that, not that F. It's the feedback and the flexibility. Those are the two biggest criteria that employees are saying they're craving. And it is the biggest area that managers say they are most discomfortable doing. Kind, candid, firm feedback. With my coaching clients, a lot of the underlying patterns that I am helping people to rewire so that they can show up and speak up is connected to feeling that you deserve to have a voice, how to raise things in a kind, clear way, how to be comfortable making other people uncomfortable, and how to do that in a way so that there are no surprises when we get to that performance at the end of the year. And the final is the T, it's the training and the time. How do we claim our time back so that we're being operational efficiencies? If nothing else, the biggest overwhelm for employees these days are the operational inefficiencies. So when managers can have the conversation, when executives can explain how they are looking to get to the root cause of how we can make things more operationally efficient to decrease the overwhelm and not just say, you're not doing your job. How could you possibly be overwhelmed? We'll find out exactly how people are spending their day and then provide the skill-based training that they need. Make sure they understand how they're supposed to be communicating, how to ask questions, help your managers with the training to be comfortable understanding how not to just do the jobs that got them promoted in the first place, but how to shift in the middle. That shift happens to being able to think strategically, to be able to lead and be the person who is a resource versus the doer. All of those shift happens, removes the obstacles that are creating the turbulence that impact trust.
I hope that's going to be a title of a book of yours at some point.
The shift happens.
Yes. Or just shift
It's
happens.
writing itself as I dance.
Yeah. As soon as you said the dance thing, you lost me, because anybody that's seen me on a dance floor knows I'm a complete dork. So enough said on that. I want to tap into this whole idea, because the one constant in this world is change, right? That's the only thing we know. And I want to tap into the neuroscience and the psychology aspect of your background. For us lay people out there, give us a brain-based insight about how people can respond to change, and what do leaders typically overlook?
The first thing you can do with change is to accept that the change is happening. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it, but it is accepting that change is now a constant and getting into the place where you're able to provide people with the reassurance that no matter what the change is, you start changing this change readiness mindset. So it's not that we're just going to navigate the change as it comes. It's we're going to build it into our culture. We're going to create a culture that is change ready. that enjoys it, that looks at it, that's constantly looking to innovate, constantly looking to improve. To do that, it's very important for leaders to start building the level of change readiness by looking at where they're ready and then understanding where they're not. One of the biggest mistakes that we've identified in the advanced applied neuroscience world is that so often people get very, very hooked up into the why. Why is this happening? Why did they do this? Why is this not working? Why? And I'm not talking about the Simon Sinek get to your why. I'm talking about the let's figure out why. From a neuroscience perspective, it doesn't matter. We do need to get to the understanding of what's causing the patterns, what's causing the tension, what's happening in the invisible space, what's happening with the trust in the implicit side where decisions are made. What happens when people are making decisions, Dave, is that we communicate the decision, but what's happening before is the internal dialogue before the decision gets made. And when that internal dialogue that each person is having, and then the side conversations that happen before a decision is communicated, it's starting there first. Because for each person, if we were to try to guess why they weren't making a decision or why they were uncomfortable doing it or why the chaos is happening, what I've learned from a neuroscience perspective is that we're typically wrong. So we've got to test our theories. We've got to try something. We've got to try it again. And when the change is hard, do it anyway. And then do it again. And then do it again. If you're looking to help someone build a new habit, whether it's productivity, time management, communication, helping them to build that habit for the opportunity to, when it's hard, do it anyway, just send one email. Take one step. Figuring out what's that one thing you need to do before noon. What's that one thing you can do today that'll make it better than yesterday and set your future self up for success tomorrow? That one thing, the small steps for change, is a lot more manageable. And when it's hard, do it anyway. You then teach your own brain. You then teach your amygdala that it's safer to move than it is to get small. And the avoidance starts to take care of itself. So from an organizational standpoint, to answer your question about what leaders can do, it's when they talk about the bigger change, make sure that you're connecting the dots, because the one question every employee wants to hear is, how is that impacting me? Start with the how it's going to impact me and get really explicit, because most executives have no idea how most people candidly spend their day. So the managers are the secret. So if you go to the manager and you say, what's the number one top thing that your employees are coming to that they're concerned about? What do we know I need to know about that? So the executives, the managers are able to talk about, this is what the change is going to look like in a small way. This is what we're expecting. This is how it's going to move. This is what's not going to change. And not just, we're adopting a new process. We're moving to a new technology system. We're moving to, how's that going to affect my day? You know, we did that when we were doing an IT transformation within my friend Joe Maggot and I did a huge project for about 18 months with an electrical company in the construction industry. And that was it. The union guys, it was the same question, no matter what industry you're in, all the men and women who were working on the front line said, how's this going to impact my day? And our answer was, well, you're going to tell us. Tell us what the biggest issues are that are causing obstacles in your day and are creating inefficiencies. What do you want to change? And because we had them involved from the beginning and they were part of the co-creation of the change, we asked what was important to them first. The best thing leaders can do to help create a change readiness environment is to gather the perspectives, the ideas, and the concerns and the ideas from employees up, down, and across your organization in different roles and at different levels. You might not do everything with it, but the employees then say, wow, Erica, I'm so honored. No one's ever asked my opinion before. That is going to be the biggest thing you can do as an employee. That's the biggest thing you can do as a leader. Bring people along with the change before you tell them about it, because ownership's a lot easier to implement than buy-in.
Well said. That's a tweetable moment, as we say. Getting down to the short strokes here, Erica, but I want you to take out your crystal ball for a second and look into the future for the next 3 to 5 years. What's the next frontier in leadership and communication strategy?
The workplace is changing rapidly. Where I'm seeing as I'm watching the trends with where things are already shifting and where they're going to be in the next 6 months, much less 5 years, is there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to need to get made about staffing, about job security, about innovative efficiencies, and where all of that starts to intersect with the people and process. As an individual, it's very important to take the steps now to prepare yourself for any kind of change so that you are prepared to take creative, innovative steps toward what your career path and what your future is going to look like. As a manager, asking the questions to make sure that you have done what you need to do for yourself so that you can support your employees, yourself, and your leadership team with what's happening next and how to communicate it so that you're ready for it, so that you can lead everyone else, so that you're not feeling like you're pushing a giant boulder up a mountain or pulling a wheelbarrow behind you filled with rocks as you're trying to move things together. Finding that ways for yourself so that you can then lead others. And the same for the organizations and the executives. Get curious. Change curiously. Figure out what is happening within your organization. Where are your strengths? How do you want people to be contributing? How do you need people to be contributing, not just in the next 6 months, but where are your growth goals? What are you moving people toward? And how do you accelerate them in a way that not only supports the company and the bottom line, but the people who are contributing toward the vitality of your organization?
Good stuff. Good stuff. Erica, unfortunately, we're out of time, but before we go, do tell the audience how they can find you, connect with you, and if they want to work with you.
The first would be check out our website, ericawexlertransforms.com, under transformational guidance. You can visit the YouTube channel, which is starting to roll out, called Got Shift to Say. And we talk about the dance of leadership with resources. And you can send me an email. You can send it to team@ericawexlertransforms.com, or you can ping me personally if you're one of Dave's listeners at erica@ericawexlertransforms.com. If you're intrigued, I would invite you to join me for a conversation.
You know, it'll be a good one for sure, gang. Erica, thanks for joining us today. Learned an awful lot from you and had some fun in the process.
Dave, it's a fun conversation as always, and thank you for the thoughtful question.
Awesome. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers with Dave Bookbinder. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment, leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. That actually really does move the needle for the show and for letting people find out about us. So your feedback helps us grow as well and give you more great content. And don't forget to crush the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, I am Dave Bookbinder reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. We'll see you next time, gang. Take care.